Hello, everybody. I'm Chad Eaves here on the Meaningful Communication Show with my co-host Michael Gansl and our guest Mason Harris. Welcome to the fourth episode of the season, meaning 2024. And if you haven't done so yet, be sure to go to the YouTube channel and hit that subscribe button. We're looking at building our followers, and also you'll get a notification of when new episodes like this come out. And we cover a lot of different topics with a lot of different interesting guests. So be sure to stay in the know and subscribe. Michael, introduce to us our guest this morning.
It'll be my pleasure. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Meaningful Communication Show. And I have the great pleasure of introducing Mason Harris. Now, Mason is a listener, speaker, author, entrepreneur, award-winning company founder. He knows a few things about selling, marketing, people, leadership, and company building. And full disclosure, he happens to be a cousin of mine. But that's not why he's on the broadcast. He's here because, well, as he says, he was born with a plastic spoon in his mouth, and his family stressed formal education. But he actually learned a lot of informal education on the streets of New York City, which is where he's from. But he did this without their permission, I can assure you that. But he's learned opportunity, perseverance, and respect for others. He's been an observer of people and a student of self-improvement and business all his career. He was fascinated by those people that are both introverted and extroverted, whose actions, determination, and risk-taking lead to more successful lives. And these behaviors and other behaviors that he's identified are the foundation of his most recent work, Chutzpah. And interviews, research, and worldwide pandemic led to his finally writing this book called The Chutzpah Advantage and teaching others the skill set for going bigger, going bolder, and doing better. And so we're going to start and say chutzpah. How do you pronounce that? Is that chutzpah? Is that hushpah? Is that chutzpah? What are we talking about, Mason?
Actually, I like the guttural sound that you just did on the last one because it implies that, oh, he's recovering from that cold. So the ch sound is not necessarily one that's very common to us. I've seen it pronounced chutzpah. I mean, if you look at the ch, it can sound as like a k, as in the word character or chaos. It can sound like ch, as in I'd like some of that chai tea. Some people drop the c right from the front, and they go straight to chutzpah. Think of it as a stop sign in New York. It's kind of there, but it's not really important, right? So you can go right through that and not worry too much.
So Chad's from the Midwest. So, it's been a challenge for him to say chutzpah. So, Chad, how do you say it?
Well, I've lived in Chicago for 10 years, but I've lived in Europe for 4 years and a bunch of other places. So at first I would make the mistake of, there's a C in it, and go, chutzpah. But then Michael was kind enough to correct me on that. And chutzpah is, I guess, would be my effort at it.
You got it. And I pronounce Chicago as Chicago. So, yes, chutzpah is how I do it, but any version, chutzpah, chutzpah.
In any version then.
Chutzpah even is one pronunciation that I hear a lot.
So what does it mean? What are we talking about?
Ooh, that's a good question, because it's not really a simple answer, and that's what I discovered in my research. But if I were to throw some names out there, Elon Musk, Serena and Venus Williams, Elizabeth Holmes, Jackie Robinson, and say, what do they have in common? You might be thinking to yourself, well, we've got business, we have sports, we have breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball couple generations ago, which might be something that all of us understand, but people today don't appreciate just how hard that was for Jackie Robinson and the courage that he showed. To me, that was all chutzpah. And why is Elizabeth Holmes in there? Aside from the fact that she's in prison at the moment, I believe. It's
yes,
because, it's because chutzpah is neither good nor bad.
Well, now hold on a second. Okay, this is your interpretation of chutzpah, neither good nor bad. Okay, so let's go back to the original meanings of chutzpah. And
what's the word chutzpah? Okay, so before I answer that, I'm going to share a very quick story. Many, many years ago when I was in college, I went to Queens College, by the way, in New York City, in Queens, for those who don't know Queens College in Queens. And Billy Joel, who was a young recording artist, had not hit it big at the time, was appearing at our college. He actually appeared there twice when I was attending Queens. And I was on the concert committee, so we got to go there in advance when the band might warm up. And we were sitting there, we'd watch him play a song, and then Billy Joel came and sat with about a dozen of us. The young guy did not have the fame that he has today. And I said to him, "Who is Captain Jack?" Because that was one of the big songs of the moment. And I learned a good lesson, because he turned it around and he said, "Who is your Captain Jack?" So you'd have to go
so far, because I don't know who Captain Jack is.
Okay, so a lot of people, Captain Jack was and I had to really research this to understand it. At the time, I thought, "Oh, Captain Jack will get you high tonight." That's a catchy lyric, and I understand the song. But in essence, he was writing about a drug dealer and how too many people. This is off the topic, but basically, it was not a positive song. And he makes that clear in his interviews later on. But the lesson I learned was one of the best ways to really think about something is to throw the question back. So I'm going to ask both of you, if I may, how do you define chutzpah? And then I'll go into how I define it.
Well, I have a fun story to tell you. Okay, my mother used to accuse my Uncle Max of chutzpah. Okay, now here's how she defined it. You spit in his face, and he'd tell you it was raining.
Okay, I have not heard that one, and maybe it'll make it into my sequel.
That's a good one, isn't it? But okay, so what did that mean? It mean that he had such gall, he had such nerve that, he would basically say anything, and it didn't mean whatever you said. You could spit in his face and he'd turn it around and tell you it was raining. So that to me was the definition of chutzpah as a child.
Okay, so you have nerve, gall. I'll throw boldness in there at the same time. Chad?
Yeah, those are actually some of the words I would have used. Also, I would probably throw out the audacity. Like, you have the audacity to do or think something that maybe it's not within the expectations or the boundaries or what people are would say is normal, that you are kind of going off on your own and doing something in spite of what people might think is appropriate or what you should be doing.
Yeah. Those are all good elements of what I ended up realizing chutzpah is. There's no easy or single synonym that really captures the essence of chutzpah and why it's really so important to people who want to change their lives, the world, their situations. It takes an effort to stretch barriers. So chutzpah, I have learned, one, it's universal. Although the term is Hebrew, and I think it originates Hebrew or Yiddish, it truly is international. I did a presentation. Go on. I'm sorry, Michael.
No, I was saying actually it originates in Hebrew and then, of course, in Yiddish.
Yes. So I did a presentation to, I think it was the American Management Association. Could have been the American Marketing Association. Those initials sometimes confuse me. But one person at the end came up to me and said, "I'm Finnish, and we have a word different than chutzpah, but it sounds so similar." And I hadn't heard it. I said, "Well, what are you talking about? What's the word?" He said, "It's sisu, sisu." Mm-hmm. And I looked it up. And sisu basically it's strength of will, it's perseverance, determination. And one critical element for both chutzpah and sisu, it's sustained throughout life. So it's not like, "Oh, I was courageous once in my life, but other than that, I'm really not that type of person." You don't have to stand up every time an opportunity arises. But if you have the chutzpah skill set And that's the key difference between how I define chutzpah and how most others do. I looked at chutzpah, and after interviewing a number of people, some common elements started coming across. Courage is one. I consider that underlying, but it's too easy a definition. Oh, the person has courage. A lot of people have courage. What separated chutzpah? Well, I created an acronym using the letters of the word chutzpah. 8 letters, and I have 8 key behaviors and characteristics that seem to apply or appear when I look at some of these people who've been very successful. And by success, I don't mean they have to be multimillionaires or founders of company, but rather they're successful because they're also very happy in their lives. They're happy with their families. They contribute back to their communities. They do things that are sometimes unexpected. And they get there through these characteristics, or certainly helps them.
So before you get to those characteristics, which I know we're going to want to hear, but I'm going to ask you one question. Why? Why is the topic of chutzpah, why has this fascinated you? Why have you written a book about it? Why have you pursued it? And literally, why have you demonstrated your own chutzpah? Because mostly, at least mostly in my world, it's always been a relatively negative, it's seen negative. And you've decided to flip it. The question is, why?
Well, the why is growing up, I was aware of people who seemed to be more confident. Doesn't mean that they were necessarily more outgoing. They could be very quiet, but it's a quiet confidence. They could be exceptional listeners. And I actually have worked to make myself a better listener. You also, Michael, you raised a great point about chutzpah having a negative connotation. And that's the truth. People I interviewed, some people would say, oh, chutzpah is not a positive characteristic. You don't want to be accused of chutzpah, whereas other people would say, that's the difference between success and failure. So such divergent feelings, definitions about this concept of chutzpah really intrigued me. So I wanted to understand, what is it about chutzpah? What are the characteristics that create chutzpah? What was the definition, which was the hardest piece? There was a Supreme Court case many, many years ago where they were discussed basically pornography. And they were trying to define pornography so they could understand what limits they might want to impose to protect society. And I don't remember who the Supreme Court justice was, but he made a comment. Basically, it was, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think chutzpah is one of those concepts as well. Very hard to define, but we sometimes say, oh, I get what that is. So the motivator for me was understanding. And by the way, I'm an entrepreneur. Yes, I write, which I enjoy doing. I wouldn't say that I'm an exceptional writer, but I believe that my readers enjoy my style. It's very much how I speak. So there's like a truthfulness to it. I'm not holding back. I try and, I know I have to edit, but what people read, when people read what I write, they go, oh, that's Mason. That's how he speaks, and this is how he writes. So I wanted to create almost a manual that would provide elements or methods of enabling people to stretch their own boundaries, their personal boundaries, to accomplish more. So on the chutzpah side, Michael, you mentioned good versus bad. I see chutzpah as a skill set. So, for example, Chad and I may end up going to school to learn computer programming or software programming. And we both graduate. We're both exceptional students. And Chad goes on and creates applications that enable businesses to become more efficient in their operations, in their accounting, in tracking the activities of salespeople, identifying areas of improvement. I, however, might decide, easier and cook away the money. I'm going to write ransomware. And I'm going to use my skill set to steal from people. So it's the same skill set, writing code. It's how we choose to implement it. So chutzpah is like that. There is constructive chutzpah and destructive chutzpah. I mentioned Elizabeth Holmes. I could have said Bernie Madoff. We all know people who, if we think about it, wow, everything you're speaking about, Mason, they have a lot of these same characteristics. And I'll shake my head and say, yeah, they chose to use them in a different way. The really interesting.
Something that that's jogging my mind as you're describing this is, how much of it is, or maybe it's predominantly, a subjective element. And I think of this in the terms of, people who are entrepreneurs, or, they decided to go their own way. Everybody thought they were going to be a doctor. The parents wanted to be there, like, no, I want to do this or something like that. And, whether or not it's a convenient label, from one side, it's negative, like, oh, you're bucking the expectations or whatever, versus on the other side, from the individual. And this is another kind of a offshoot question I have from this is, it's more of the identification or the liberation of the individual. It's like, okay, you have these expectations on me, but that's not me. And I think that's a really interesting kind of inflection point we're at as a society right now, is the supremacy of the individual, which is very much an American value, versus that, oh no, you need to follow the herd. And kind of where we are right now, especially with, the millennial generation or whatever else, is, have you ever seen that or considered that to be a cyclical strength? Or do you think it's more situational, like, in society with what we're going through, like coming out of the pandemic, like you said, that inspired you to write the book? What's your perspective on that?
I think, and this is very much related to your answer. People ask sometimes the same things, but they ask, does everybody have chutzpah? Is it inherited or is it learned? So as far as, is it cyclical? If you would ask, forget your skill set and your 8 characteristics, Mason, give me you have 15 seconds on an elevator. Tell me what chutzpah is about. I won't even take 15 seconds. I'm going to tell you it's about stretching boundaries, taking risks, accepting that you're going to fail, and then getting up and learning from your failures. So I believe that there's some element of chutzpah that we're all born with, because chutzpah is about challenging, stretching boundaries. And as kids, we don't hesitate to stretch boundaries with our siblings or our parents. And at some level, we're even encouraged. I had somebody say at another presentation that I did, I'm really a quiet person. I'm an introvert. I don't know that I have any chutzpah. And my response was, do you ride a bicycle? And the answer was, well, yeah, I learned as a kid. I go, when you first learned, were you scared? And he was like, well, yeah, but my older brother rode and I wanted to be like him. So I was willing to learn, and my parents would run behind me on the bicycle and hold on to me. And I said, pretty scary, right? He goes, yeah, it was. Did you fall? I did. Did you get back up? Yeah, a day later. And I got back up on my bicycle and I learned how to ride. So initially that was a very tough skill to learn. Now it's second nature. There's no thought about, okay, watch where I'm going, maintain my balance, maintain enough speed so I can control the bicycle. They learn this as kids. Unfortunately, our school system teaches people not to stretch boundaries, but to follow the rules. So that little bit of chutzpah, of learning, of stretching, of challenging goes away as soon as we enter that structured environment that typically doesn't encourage it. Now, as we get older, we might see people and say, wow, they did it a different way. Maybe I should be doing something different. We see people in business schools, entrepreneurs. Every entrepreneur, in my mind, has some level of chutzpah, because there's that risk. There's the very high probability of failure. And the willingness to make errors. And that becomes part of one of the characteristics in my acronym, by the way. But the immigrant who moves to the U.S. and opens up a sandwich shop, a Subway shop, has chutzpah. They're basically saying, I'm here, I can follow the path of everybody else, or I can work my butt off and do something different. In growing up in New York, it was every time I turned around, there was a new fruit market opening up on a corner, and they were immigrant run. And the family would work there, and they'd work long hours. It's like you could be coming home from a late dinner, and there that fruit market is still open. That takes chutzpah. That says that's a level of perseverance that enables people to say, I'm going to take advantage of the opportunities that I have. I'm not waiting for somebody to give me things. I'm going to earn them myself. Hopefully that answers the question, Chet.
Yeah, that reminds me of the whole make them say no. Like that's a very prevalent attitude, like in the military. My dad was he was enlisted, became an officer, and I was in the Navy. But it was like, if you want to do something, don't just say, like, it took him, I don't know how many years to become an officer because he had bad eyesight. It was like, make him tell you no. And, you keep, going against that. One quick thing, I know Michael's got a question for you. There's actually a movie called Sisu. It's a small Finnish independent movie. And it's about this guy in World War II that finds gold, and the Nazis are trying to take it from him.
Yes.
And that's he definitely exhibits the Sisu trait. So
I've heard of the movie, haven't seen it yet. I know it's kind of like a rom-com, right? I'm kidding. It's very violent.
Yeah, just like Rambo.
By the way, thank you for your service and your family, your dad. That really is important. And I cannot let that go without expressing my appreciation to you.
Thank you, Mason.
So I want to come back to your book writing and your style of writing, and you seem to have this knack for acronyms. Now, remember, you did that in your first book.
Yes.
What was the name of your first book, Mason?
Entree Marketing: 6 Critical Principles for the Overworked Restaurateur.
There you go.
And the letters of entree were the foundation of this marketing model that I thought would help people.
And you've applied that here in the book, the Chutzpah Advantage.
Well, it's a great point you just made. There is a book, some of you may have heard of it. I don't think it was all that successful. I think it was The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People.
Yeah, it wasn't all that successful.
Yeah. I think I don't know, 10 million copies sold. It was a wonderful book. And as I started working on my chutzpah piece, which originally was designed for salespeople, because I was coming from a very sales and entrepreneurial background, I believe everybody sells. And by sell, I mean persuade. We get through life by persuading, by getting people to cooperate with us. That's persuasion. And I ended up with a number of these characteristics. And I said, I don't want to duplicate this book. I want something memorable and catchy. So I started thinking in terms of chutzpah. And that's how I came up with it, because I wanted to differentiate, and I wanted people to think, oh, that's that chutzpah guy I heard speak. They didn't have to remember my name, as long as they remembered chutzpah. Now, how these 8 things, what did Mason speak about? What was the C? What was the H? What was the U? Because I think it applies right now. Well, which of those characteristics do I need to focus on to solve this problem? So good point on that. Michael, you're a fan. That's it. 10% off my next book.
Oh, I'll take it, if you don't mind. I'll hold you to that. We have this as proof. We have that. But anyway, let's go back.
Don't tell Chad about the discount.
I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch. I don't want to think about how many dollars I'm going to get. Tell us about the acronyms.
Okay, the acronym. So let's think. A lot of these characteristics are things we experience and see every day. So we're all familiar with Nike's slogan, right? Just do it. Well, that was an original concept from an advertising standpoint, very creative. It helped elevate Nike above its competition. But in essence, that's been around since the beginning of mankind. And there is a Latin expression that in essence covers just do it, and it's called carpe diem. seize the day, seize the opportunity. And if it existed back in those days, people who understood that there are opportunities that abound. Some are there right in front of you. Some you create, some you recognize, some you have to strategize over and say, this makes sense. So Carpe Diem is about no more excuses, get started today. And that's the first element. You don't have chutzpah if you haven't initiated something. Shark Tank is a great example. People sitting watching the show with their orange soda and their Cheetos, and they're going, "Oh my God, I had that idea 7 years ago, and Mark Cuban just invested in him. I could have gotten Mark Cuban as a business partner." Well, you never implemented. You never seized the day. You never took that great idea. I can't say why you didn't. Maybe you were scared of failure. Maybe you had things going on in your life at the time. Maybe you didn't have the money. But in essence, getting started somehow, part-time, full-time, finding the money, that's the first element of
the second element.
The what?
The next one.
The H. Okay. We are all proficient at handling objections to some level. If you're in sales, you are trained specifically to handle objections. If you just interact with people in the office, since not as many people, since fewer people are going to the office as much, the interaction might be virtual. But again, this gets to the persuasion side. Somebody objects to an idea. We can say, well, you're completely wrong, and there's going to be very little agreement there. Or we can respond in some way that says, I'm trying to understand your opposition, and I like what you just said. So if we somehow solve that problem, does that make this idea better? Because now we've eliminated that concern you have. So handling objections is about it's a communication issue, but it's also understanding, listening very, very well. Not the sales side, we would say a salesperson who keeps talking about features and benefits is probably not going to make the sale as well as the salesperson who asks questions to understand what needs exist. And that gets to actually another one of the characteristics. So that's the A.
And on the U.
Yes, the U. Uncovering need, pain, and opportunity is critical for persuading. So sometimes it happens. Let's move it from the sales side. Let's take another example. Let's take starting a business. I don't know if you guys have this in New York yet, but there's this company that's doing, I think, rather well called Uber. I remember my days back in New York. There were more cabs on the street, medallion cabs, pre-Uber days, than there were citizens in probably a third of the cities across the country. There was a cab, there was a line of cabs traveling up and down the streets of Manhattan all day long. No problem getting one, unless if the weather was bad. And then it was like, wow, now you really see people's getting ferocious. That old lady just knocked that guy over with her umbrella. This is worth watching, but we didn't have cameras to film it. So how did Uber get started? You basically had two very successful entrepreneurs. And I'm trying to remember, their names. And they're not in the book. But anyway, you're two successful entrepreneurs. They had made millions. They were at a business conference in Paris, France, not the one in Texas, Paris, France. And they're in there and they're friendly and they're speaking and they decide they're going to take a cab back to their hotel. Well, while they were in the convention center, there was a blizzard and they came outside and all they could see was empty roads covered in snow. And they're thinking, well, Paris, there are cabs going by right and left. It's like New York. They could not get a cab. So at the time, they're carrying Blackberries. And it's like they're looking up and down that they couldn't call for a cab. Nobody was answering the limo services. So we think that, there's so many transportation options open to us. They're standing there freezing, going, it's a shame we can't order a phone from our BlackBerry. And that was the genesis of this idea. They ended up walking back to their hotel, a couple miles, freezing, get back to the States, and they pick up on this idea, which was not very well received by the private equity people, the venture capital people. They're like, there are cabs and taxi and limousine commissions all over the place. There are buses, trains, rickshaws. If you're in Asia, there are all these options. What they did was they saw a need that existed, but nobody cared to solve that need or fill it until it became a pain. They felt the pain as they froze.
So you would say, okay, so your U covers uncovering pain. All right.
Need, pain, and then opportunity. Some people freeze because they can't get a cab and they just go back to work and life. These people.
That's uncovering. Okay, I got you. So that uncovering pain kind of leads to the T, right? Because when you use the Uber folks as an example of uncovering pain, you also have to get to the T, because they also did that. So tell us about what it is.
The T stands for trailblazing. The idea that whether or not this is a well-traveled road, or I'm going to be the one that creates this pathway for others, I'm going to go down. Now, trailblazers frequently fail because there's so many unknowns in the beginning. That's why we follow on the footsteps of others. Being a trailblazer could be business related, but you could also be the first person in your family to go to college. All your siblings and cousins, they all stayed in the same small area and worked in the coal mines or the factories or the farms because that was what was expected. And you thought, no, I want something a little bit different. And I'm really intrigued by this, and I want to learn more about it in college. That's trailblazing as well.
So now you've uncovered the pain, you're blazing the trail, but what happens next? What do we call, what's that Z?
Well, Z is about obstacles that are thrown in your path when you pursue anything worthwhile, especially. You decide, in the case of, let's go back to Uber for a second. They had this idea. They weren't getting a great reception, by the way, in trying to fundraise. But people with Z will zigzag around serious obstacles. It's different than a handling of objections. Rather, it's about, I'm not giving up. I'm going to go around, above, under, whatever this objection is. I've got the perseverance, the determination. I'm going to sustain my action in the face of this adversity. That's what people who zigzag do. It came from back in my graduate school days at University of Buffalo. I used to play Pac-Man. And when I was thinking of, okay, how does a Z fit in, it came to me that was a game about avoiding those bad dots that would eat you and end your game and take your quarter, building up strength, education, connections, confidence, experience, and moving forward, even though inevitably there would be setbacks. So that's where zigzag came.
And then I'm just following along. I know these. I've got these 8 acronyms. So, Chad, you want to catch the next one?
Well, actually, I was going to say, if you could summarize the next, was it 3 for us? I think PAH. If you could summarize those real fairly quickly, and then how can someone take this information? Because I think this is one of the biggest problems with when we go out there and do presentations and speaking and stuff like that. People will get that high. They saw the presentation, they went to the conference or something like that. What do people do with it next? How do they take that chutzpah, and it's sustainable for them. It's something that they can adopt and make a part of their life going forward.
Okay, so let me start with the next 3, then I'll address how they make that part of their lives. Okay, the P it's interesting. You mentioned your military background. There's a lot that's been written about American POWs during Vietnam, during the war. John McCain, for example, being one great example of leadership while a prisoner, but not the only one. There are a lot of people. Basically, P stands for purpose. I write a bit about the military and particularly POWs and how a sense of their purpose helped them get through those very, very rough years. But it actually initiated for me from a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp. He was also a psychiatrist. And he describes from his professional experience and personal what separated people who survived from people who didn't. The first element, which is beyond our control, is luck. So sometimes we have good luck, sometimes we have bad luck. We can't always control that. We might be able to influence it by getting educated, by networking, to open up more doors. But ultimately in the camps, if you had the misfortune to be chosen by a Nazi guard to go to the gas chambers, it's it. It was over. You weren't going to get away. You were sent on one line, and that was the end. But if you didn't, it was Viktor Frankl's observation that for those who were not selected, did not unfortunately succumb to that bad luck on that particular day, he could start getting a sense of who was going to make it and who wasn't. And he described it as purpose. People who had something that they were living for or motivated for that was beyond the camp, beyond the terror and the experiences they had a much better chance of surviving because they learned how to live with less food, how to live with the terror, the beatings, or whatever it was that was thrown against them that made their lives miserable. But people who gave up, who didn't have that purpose, were more likely to get sick, to fall down during work, to not move as quickly, and then get selected. So that's where purpose is. It enables us to get through life's toughest challenges.
And possibly then eliminate some of the ambiguity that exists in life. So you've got the next two, ambiguity and humility. Can you?
Yes. So the A stands for ambiguity elimination. Basically, we have to make decisions every day in our lives. A lot of them are easy. What am I having for dinner? Okay, maybe my wife can't make that decision, but I can make that relatively quickly. She's going to weigh all the options. But in terms of making a decision, we evaluate, well, if I do this, this could happen, this will happen, this might happen, that type of thing, versus this. So how do I choose among these options? Learning to eliminate ambiguity and understanding that some decisions are a lot more complex than others makes a big difference. Jeff Bezos writes about and spoke about what he calls a one-way door versus a two-way door decision. And a two-way door decision is a company buyer says, okay, I need office supplies. Should I go with this vendor or with this vendor? That's an easy decision from the standpoint of if I make the wrong decision, it doesn't destroy my company. I just change vendors next time. I'm buying paper clips right now. I can easily overcome a bad decision here. The one-way door decision is I'm betting the company's outcome on moving in this direction. That takes a lot more thought, a lot more input from your team. Yes, Michael.
Well, I want to just, for the interest of time, I can listen to you for another hour, but for the interest of time, we don't have that much time. But here's what I find fascinating, and it's, tell me where you find humility in chutzpah. That's your H. That's your last letter.
The second H is about humility, and that's the surprise one. We're familiar with the book Good to Great.
Yeah.
A classic in business. Basically, humility is one of those levels of leadership that's not necessarily appreciated until we start comparing companies that do well versus companies that don't, companies that are in there for the long term and survive through the ups and downs. People respond to leaders who share the positive and the negative. And by that, it's not, we know people out there, particularly politicians, who are going to jump in, and if something's good, look what I did. Look what happened when I was elected. They're quick to grab credit that came from, could be people who were in that role previously or from their team. And if something goes wrong, it wasn't me. That decision was made by somebody before me. And they're quick to absolve themselves, or if I had better people in this role. Humility is about our humanity. It's about our reputation. Do people want to work with us? So that's that last stage. How do the second part of this was, how do people think back to these? Well, one, the acronym helps you think in terms of, God, I have a problem right now because I cannot get financing for my company. Well, that's not about the carpe diem. You're already doing that. You're already underway. It's not about necessarily trailblazing, but it is about zigzagging around. So what other alternate sources of financing have you not thought of? As an example. In the workshops that I do, I try and focus on exercises, stories, and thinking about if you're facing this type of problem, if you're having problems making decisions. There are a number of decision-making models we're going to go over now that will help you down the road.
Very cool. Now, I think about the different business leaders or leaders in general that are out there that people would know. And, it's one of those things like, like a Chutzpah reading list, would be kind of an interesting concept. And I don't know, one person that pops to my mind, Mason, would be Richard Branson.
Yes, absolutely.
As far as, all those traits that you were walking through, I was like, okay, I could see like most of them, he's kind of checking the boxes on those.
Yes, we can pick the company, pick the person, and I bet we can find these characteristics show up. As far as the reading list, there are a couple of books. It's funny. I've gone through. I have so many books in boxes now. But Robert Cialdini, who wrote Influence, which is about persuasion. I took his book back out because I want to reread it, especially during these days. Boy, I'm looking at a couple of books here now. Spin Selling by Neil Rackham, which really was the foundation for me for the uncovering need and pain. I added the opportunity side, and Uber is a great example of that. Lots of us recognize, there are needs, but people don't necessarily solve the need until it becomes a pain. And then once the pain's gone, they forget about it. What other people do is say, there's an opportunity here. Because if I'm experiencing this, other people probably are too. That was the genesis of Uber. And then, of course, I mentioned Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That's a very powerful book. Well, we can go on for quite a while. I see that we probably have extended ourselves beyond what we normally do, but it has been fascinating. And so I'm actually let's get some last words in here. I have some last words. How about we let you go first, Chad, then we let you go, Mason, and then I wouldn't mind having the last word. So, Chad, what do you think?
Well, I think, what you've shared, today, Mason, is, a framework, that people can, look for guidance. 'Cause that's one of the things I find a lot when I work with people primarily in the area of communication strategy. And, they might know where they want to get, but they don't know how to get there. Or maybe they're hitting those different roadblocks, where, they're dead in the water instead of zigzagging and stuff like that. And I think that's what a lot of people do, is they're looking for that framework that looks for them in different situations. And I think this is, what you've described, what it offers for people. It's a term from people are familiar with, but also, like, I'm not Jewish, for example. I know the term, but it's enough of a, what is it deeper? that people could be, intrigued to find out more, for that kind of example. So I think it brings a lot to people. I hope people check out your book for sure. And we'll put your contact information, your website, Chutzpah Guy, in the show notes for sure, and that people explore it and see what they can learn and what can help them with it.
Well, I guess I'm up now.
You're up now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Chad,
Michael's he did dibs on the last spot.
Right.
So.
Right. Chad, that was a great way to describe it, and it's how I intended it. I want to create a framework. Doesn't mean every element's going to be appropriate at every time, or everybody who we can think of as will have followed it. There's no necessary order in this. Obviously, some things have to come before others. But the idea of a framework and saying, these are the problems I have, or this is what I'm trying to solve, or this is what my company's trying to solve. When company founders and presidents say, well, how is this going to benefit my company? My response is frequently, do you have chutzpah? How would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 100? And most of the time they'll say 80 to 100. I've had some people say 110% or 110, or even somebody said 1,000, which is kind of fun to hear. And because I'll say, why? What makes you 10 times better or more chutzpah oriented than others? So I'll say, you have it. That's great. That's what's made you successful. Do your employees have that same chutzpah? Do you want people who understand how you got there and are just going to follow you? Or do you want them to break barriers, to solve problems, to challenge, to be more creative in their ideas and their implementation? That's where chutzpah is important. It's not about a person. It's about an organization on the business side.
Well said. I would agree with both of you. I think it is indeed a framework for guidance, and I think people have it inside them. I think sometimes it's just a question of unlocking that determination, that inner strength. And so for me, what I learned today was that chutzpah is really a skill set. It's a means to stretch one's boundaries, take risks, accept challenges, have a willingness to accept failure, and then, of course, learn from those failures. Actually, I've always said to people, how do you know you made a mistake? It cost you money, from a sales or a business perspective. And then they say, well, how do you know you made a big mistake? And then I say, it cost you a lot of, and I won't choose the expletive, money. But that being said, I want to thank you, Mason. This was really terrific. Really, again, I could listen to you for another hour, but we don't have that much time anymore. We've gone quite a bit, but it's been wonderful. Thank you for coming on our show. Chad, actually, I thought I had the last word, but you have the last words, Chad. Let's wrap it up.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mason, thank you for joining us today. Michael, as always, thank you for co-piloting the show here today. Again, if you haven't done it yet, go ahead and make sure you subscribe to that show. And also, this will be on LinkedIn and some other social media platforms as well. And there'll be also the contact information for Mason for his website. And you can go there and see other ways to follow him and learn more from him. And I'm sure links to his book. So again, Mason, thank you very much. Everybody else, thank you for staying here with us for this conversation. And have a good day. Be safe, be prosperous, and we'll be back next time.
Wait, I don't get the last word? Okay, very quickly. Because I have chutzpah. Thank you both. And also thanks to your audience. Appreciation to your audience for tuning in. Thank you guys because you do this regularly and you are having an impact on people who pay attention. Your audience, they want more. And I appreciate that and the time that they spent listening to this. I'm good.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Awesome words to end on.
Bye-bye.